Hey guys, this is Jeff, and welcome to Jeffrey Scott Reads a Lot. This is a new YouTube channel that I'm starting that I wanted to do book reviews for. I recently, earlier this year, got back into reading again after not reading for a long time or just reading a book here and there, but recently got really inspired to start reading again and read, a lot more often and pretty quickly, actually. And the first book that I wanted to review on this channel is S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. I found out about this book after joining a Facebook House of Leaves book club where they had a scheduled reading of the book, which I didn't follow, but I found that it was really, to me at least, a lot more interesting to see the recommendations that people had of books that they read, because House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski is very, not confusing, but it's got a lot of layers to it. I didn't really find it confusing. Some people do. But the people who joined the group were asking, do you have any recommendations on books that are similar to this? Because I'm kind of want to keep in this genre of kind of, spooky, mysterious type of book. And I came across many, many good ones that I actually bought and plan to read. This was one of them, and it just sounded really interesting to me. So I went out and bought it, and unfortunately didn't like it too much, and I'll get into that. But I wanted to do this first book review because I felt like it would be a good starter, because I had a lot to say about it, really. Because I didn't like it, I had a lot to say about it. And what I think could have been done differently. So to start off, it's by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. J.J. Abrams, the movie director, TV producer who's done Star Wars, Star Trek, etc. The story was thought of by him and actually written by Doug Dorst. And it comes in this sleeve here, but there's a couple layers of storytelling. So the name of the actual book is S, but it comes shrink wrapped because inside of S here, there's a story called a book called Ship of Theseus by V.M. Straka. Now, V.M. Straka is a fictional author within this fictional world, and he's like in this world, he's a very prominent literary figure. Around like the 1940s, and this is his 19th and final novel before he died. And a lot of controversy and secrecy follows him because he's supposed to be part of a secret society called the S. And he thinks, or many people who read these books think that he's passing, secret messages back and forth between the different members through this book and through other books. So that's one layer of story, the Ship of Theseus, which is this actual, novel text. Sorry, let me see if I can open this up. I don't have a lot of room here. So in the middle here, this is just regular, type text, for the book. But on the sides, there's another layer of storytelling right here. You'll notice that what looks like handwritten notes, which they are, between two characters named Eric and Jen. Eric is a graduate student who got kicked out of school from his professor, who was also doing research about V.M. Straka. So Eric was doing his graduate research on V.M. Straka. His professor stole all of his research, and he got kicked out of school. And his professor plans on writing a book about V.M. Straka with all of his information that he found with his assistant. And Jen is a undergrad student who happens to pick up this book from the library that Eric has left it at, notices his handwritten notes in the margins, responds to them, and then he picks it up again, and they start going back and forth by leaving the book in the library, and they start having conversations about the story itself, how it's affecting them, their lives, and they start to know more about each other, and how Eric got expunged from school, how Jen isn't really into the major that she's chosen, but she's done it because her parents said that she had to do it, and for fear of kind of like disappointing them. But as the story goes on, she's realizing, you know what, I'm kind of doing this not for myself, but for them, and it's kind of, really irritating me. So this story is really kind of bringing out, in their lives what they are ticked off about, what they're happy about, how it's, just how it's affecting them on a daily basis. So the main story, Ship of Theseus, follows a character by the name of S, who we find out his name is S pretty early on, but not right away, because he wakes up on a shoreline outside of like a port, like a ship. I'm not saying that right. Like a harbor. That's the right word. Harbor. He washes up on shore. He's all wet. He doesn't realize, or he doesn't remember who he is at all. He has no memory of anything about his life except that he's here now and he's wondering what he should do. The only thing that he has in his pocket is a little piece of paper with the letter S on it, which is in that same shape that's on that cover. So he starts walking around this town, and eventually he walks inside of a pub, and he sees a woman that he thinks that he might recognize, who we later on find out that her name is Sola, S-O-L-A. And she kind of gives him the eyes, like, I think I know who you are, or I know who you are, but I'm not saying anything. So he goes over and starts talking to her, making small talk. And in the middle of them talking, he gets kidnapped. So like a sack gets put over his head, and he gets dragged out. And when he wakes up, he's on this ship. And this to me is kind of where it starts falling apart, which is really early on, which is unfortunate. Because I didn't really have any hopes for the book, but everybody seemed that they were, everybody seemed to make it out like it was this great novel, which I didn't really like it. I didn't really care for it, but I can see the elements of why people liked it. But so this ship is crewed by a man named Maelstrom, and all the crew members are very, very strange. They all have their lips sewn shut with thread. They don't speak to each other at all. And it's kind of like a ghost ship, except they're not ghosts, if that makes sense. It's very eerie. There's a supernatural element to it. They all communicate, at least Maelstrom and the important figures on the ship, they all communicate with these little whistles that they have hanging around their neck. So he'll play a little tune, and rather than speaking to them, he'll play like a melody, and then they'll know, okay, it's time to lower that sail, or it's time to, steer the ship this way. So he uses these little whistle melodies in order to direct them on what to do. And S is kind of an observer on the ship. They never force him to work, but they tell him that he can't leave. Eventually, that first trip, they crash land onto an island, where S finds himself in the middle of this revolution that's happening on this island between a corrupt factory owner and his workers. Like, they want, fair compensation, but more importantly, they're being, laid off, and they're being murdered, and they just want, all this corruption to stop. And S kind of falls in the middle of this by, getting in the middle of this crowd, and he's kind of getting glances from people like they know who he is, or like he seems to be important somehow, but he doesn't even know who he is himself yet. But the thing is that we never really find out either. So, and that's kind of what ticked me off about this book, is that he's had amnesia this whole time, and he's trying to figure out who he is. But each new time that he gets on the ship and goes to a different place, it's almost like what's he working towards, you know? Like he's trying as hard as we are to figure out who he is, but nobody's really giving him information. They kind of just accept him into their role and into their, you know, their revolution in their lives. So, you know, I kind of chop it up into these little sections where like the main sections of the book. So he's in this harbor, he gets kidnapped and gets taken on this ship for the first time. The ship not crashes on the island, but like it hits a storm and he escapes. So he like swims to shore again. He gets onto this island with all these, you know, revolutionaries, goes through the whole scenario with them, is eventually escaping the people who are going after that group that he's with, which is part of Vovoda and his crew, which is that corrupt factory leader, and then gets back on the ship again after it's been repaired somehow that they don't explain. And he's wondering himself, how is this ship repaired when I just saw it destroyed? And, you know, so he gets back on the ship again, goes to another island that's kind of fighting the same fight that these people are. And then, you know, there's the ending. So I get to the ending. But this whole book to me was very hard to follow because it was so scattered. Like they never, when S is on the ship and he's asking Maelstrom, the leader, all these questions like, why do you guys sew your lips together? Like, what is that about? Because when they overtake another ship, they take a prisoner, and then eventually later on, he sees that ceremony where they're all around him and he's starting to sew his lips shut. So there's this supernatural element of, or not supernatural, but this tradition that they have. And when S asks Maelstrom, why do you guys do that? He just says, oh, it's part of the tradition. It's like, what tradition? What tradition are you talking about? Like, why do you guys have to do this? It doesn't make any sense. There's no explanation as to what the origin of this was, you know, where it came from. And that was kind of frustrating to me because I wanted to know. And there is a supernatural element to this ship. So when they're on the ship and they're on there for maybe 3 weeks, in land time, that's been a couple years. So time is accelerated outside of this ship, which is a cool idea, but they never explain the supernatural element. Where did that come from? Why is this ship supernatural? Where did it come from? Like, did someone perform some kind of ritual to make it that way? We don't know. And we never find out. Which is really disappointing because a ship that can not go through time, but where their time is slowed down compared to the rest of the world. That's a cool idea. And although the lip stitching is really creepy, it would be nice to know the origin of that story, where that came from, which we never find out. And to make it worse, throughout all this confusion of the story, Jen and Eric's their margin notes are increasingly sporadic, and I couldn't follow because every time they think that they find out who VM Straka was, they're throwing out names like who are like people who are important in this fictional world, right? Who it might be. And I couldn't keep the names straight. They're very odd names. He uses Doug Dorst, I'll just say VM Straka. VM Straka uses these names where that are just so confusing that I couldn't keep straight. Like the first time that S lands on the island, he gets into a group where their names are like Ostrero and Pfeiffer and Stenfalk. And I'm like, I obviously recognize all these names, but like I couldn't remember like who was a female, who was a male, who was paired with, because they're all like couples together, who was coupled with, with this person and that person. And I just found it very hard to follow. And when Jen and Eric are referencing these fictional people, not within the story, but the fictional people of who VM Straka might be, it was very hard to follow because they're throwing out names like that, and they say, "Oh, I think I found another clue that might lead it to this person. Oh, I think I found another clue that might lead it to this person," and it's just 450 pages of them trying to figure out who he is. And it was really exhausting. I'm not going to lie. It was really exhausting having all of those margin notes because I just couldn't keep them straight. It's a really cool idea, but I think it fell short, unfortunately. I think the book could have been, like cut in half, really. I don't know how, but I felt I would have been more okay with it being shorter. I mean, the story Ship of Theseus itself is 450 pages, and that's not including all of the extra margin notes that you have to read. So there's 450 pages of story, and then you have to read all these margin notes. So I don't think I'm overreaching when I say that those margin notes could have added in another 100 pages to the story, So I found that very difficult to follow, unfortunately. And, this entire time that you're reading the book, you're trying to figure out with S who he is, because these people who are capturing him and leading him to new areas are they're kind of hinting that he was an important person. And they said, like, I forget who it was that said it, but someone said, well, you're the only person that was able to escape Vovoda, like his factory, or you knew some information about him and, you escaped somehow. But they never explain, what the information was, how he got there in the first place. And what really ticked me off is that they almost threw it away. There was a throwaway line. I'm kind of summarizing. It was kind of a couple lines, but Sola basically says to him, does it really matter who you were? It matters who you are right now. And I was like, oh, you did not just say that. You did not just throw away that entire book of trying to figure out who S is by using that line of, well, it doesn't really matter who you were, it matters who you are right now. And it's like, such a cliche that was really disappointing because they almost use his amnesia as an excuse for us not to know who he is, like, I understand if the character has amnesia and he can't figure it out, but like, it wasn't really rewarding at all by them saying that. Like, I wanted more. I wanted to know why he escaped from Vovoda. What was he doing there in the first place? Why is the ship, supernatural? Why did they do this tradition? So it was very hard to follow. I know I keep saying that, but it's almost scattered for me to try to think of these things too, because of how choppy it was. And another instance of that comes at the end of the book, in the final chapter, which was unfinished by him. And there's speculation, among the editors and other people who, like, where his words end and where the person who actually finished his story, where they start. And this final chapter also has this type of supernatural, all of a sudden I'm here type of feel to it. So he gets into what he calls the Winter City, and they make it out to be like an afterlife type of place where time kind of just exists. Everybody who's in there doesn't really concern themselves with the problems of, like, the real world. They get newspapers of what's happening in the real world, but it's like nobody really they're just kind of indifferent about it. And that chapter starts off with him in the Winter City, as if, we're supposed to expect, okay, like we just accept the fact that he's here now, which I guess doesn't really stray away from the rest of the book, but still, it was like, and they don't explain the Winter City, what it actually is, we're assuming that it's an afterlife of some kind. But then he goes back to the real world. He gets back into the Vovoda fight and then has like not a final showdown with him, but like, you know, he's put into this situation by the group of people who are trying to overthrow him by, you know, trying to poison the people who are the thousand people who are, you know, supporting Vovoda and his weapons that he's making, and you know, his corruption, basically funding his war, I guess you could say. And he's got this, you know, mentality. S has got this mentality of, well, am I really any better than them if I poison them? It's like, you know, you kind of throughout the book kind of expect him to be on the side of, yeah, I want to eliminate this opposing threat as much as I can, but at the very end he kind of just falters, and instead of like poisoning them to kill them, he poisons them to make them really sick. So they're all like running out into the woods, going to the bathroom and throwing up and stuff. And it was just very odd. It was like he kind of backed out at the last second, and I guess that was supposed to be the big payoff, was him, you know, defeating all these guys, but that never happened either. So just felt to me like a lot of disappointments one after another. But I will say this, what the book does very well is its experimentation and its uniqueness, because I've never seen a book like this before. One thing that I forgot to bring up, which is actually a pretty big part of it, is not only do you get, you know, Ship of Theseus and the side margin notes, but stuck in between these pages, which is another reason why mainly the only reason why it's shrink wrapped, you get these little inserts, and I'll try to hold this up if I can, because without them falling out, which was actually kind of annoying reading the book. So you get these little inserts, like this one's like a postcard, and so like when Eric goes on vacation to, where is this? Brazil. You know, he'll send a postcard to Jen talking about his experiences and the people that he went with, and he'll send a postcard, and you can read what he wrote on the postcard. So that's one little insert. Another one, let me see if I don't even know where it is. Let's see here. I won't take up too much time if I can't find it. One of these pages, there's like here it is. No, I just passed it. There's like a handwritten letter from Jen to Eric about her life and an incident that happened in her life that she wasn't completely honest about. So she includes this like yellow, like loose leaf paper that's like 5 pages long, that basically explaining. Oh wait, no, sorry, this is Eric's, but you get the point. Eric has an incident that he tells Jen about. Jen also writes an account of hers, kind of like that, back when they were kids, and things that they've gotten into and how it's, put them on a trajectory towards, a life that they have now, things that they're guilty about and stuff like that. So not only do you get those side notes, you get those little inserts that just add to the layer of storytelling, which is really cool. But unfortunately for me, that doesn't redeem it, because I was still expecting a lot of content from the story itself. And there is a lot of content, but for me, it just didn't grip me like I wanted it to. And when I started reading again this year, I made a pact to myself that I said, even if I dislike a book, I'm going to finish it no matter what, even if I hate it. And the reason being is that I've purchased so many books in my life, and I either don't finish them, or I start them and I don't finish them, or I just don't even pick them up at all. And as I don't even know what the right word is, but I told myself, you know what, I'm going to finish, even if I'm not liking the book, I'm still going to finish it anyway out of principle. I'm going to finish it out of principle. So this one I finished out of principle, because I didn't want to quit on it. But I remember towards the end, I was getting really angry that the book wasn't over yet. And that's really honest, I guess. But I was getting angry that it wasn't over. I remember being on page maybe like 443. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, there's only 445 pages. So I'm on page 443. I'm like, I'm almost going to finish this book. I turn the page and I'm like, oh, this doesn't look like the last page. And I keep flipping and there's, 10 or 12 more pages after that. And I just let out this audible, like, are you kidding me? And I just really wanted it to be over, kind of, and I never really read a book that I didn't like. Maybe that's because I always never finished the ones that I didn't like. But just to recap, I think what it does really well is the complexity of it, because there is, the main story, and then you've got Jen and Eric's perspective, and to be able to weave that all together, that's no easy feat at all. But what I think that the book doesn't do well is I think it's too long. I think it could have, I don't know what could have been cut out, but I think it just could have been shorter, because there's only there's 450 pages, but there's only 10 chapters in the book. So reading a chapter is, 45 to 50 pages sometimes, and that can get pretty tiring. Like there were a couple times where I read, maybe 40 pages at a time, which for a book like this, I think, that's pretty considerate, including all of the margin notes. And I found it, I guess, more enjoyable reading it larger sections at a time, because if you're just picking up for maybe 20 minutes and you're reading 5 pages or 6 pages, I didn't find it that's the right way to read it, because of, all the confusing names in there. I couldn't keep everybody straight. So if I read it at longer sections at a time, I was able to kind of remember, okay, this is who they were talking about. But if you read 6 pages and then the next day you read another 6, you're like, oh, wait a minute, who were they talking about again? And it was hard enough to keep track of that anyway. But I found if it was read in short spurts, it was even harder to keep track of. So I think some of the things that the book doesn't do well is it seemed like there was a lack of focus of like a climax of, figuring out who S is and just explaining these things. I wanted to know why S was the only one that escaped Vovoda. I wanted to know just more about S in general. I wanted to know why the ship was supernatural, why its time was slower on the ship and faster in like land time, which is never explained. I wanted to know why the ship had the tradition of people sewing their lips together. And the ship has been repaired a few times after its, collisions and storms that it's been through. And sometimes, they'll say that some of the crew had been replaced, but there was no explanation as to how they got more crew or how they repaired the ship in the first place, So another thing is that when reading it, a lot of the time these inserts would fall out. And at the beginning of when I made this video, I noticed something fell out. Another little insert that, you just kind of crack the book open a little bit and something falls out and you're like, oh crap, like what page was that on? So it's kind of, to me, a lot to ask for someone to be like, all right, I know that there's inserts in these pages. Let me go through all the pages and mark what page they're on so that they don't fall out in the middle of me reading it. And I thought that's like, some people have done that. I'm like, really, do I have to work that hard to like read a book? And I'm not new to weird books, because House of Leaves is my favorite book. Mark Z. Danielewski is my favorite author. So I'm not dissing, strange books or new ways of writing things, but it just felt like, I don't know, it just kind of made me angry a little bit that like all these little things just kind of added up and took away from the experience. Trying to think if I've forgotten anything. I don't think I have. Oh, another thing that's visually cool, so the visuals of it, obviously, I think are the best part. the story and the plot and the, all of that, the actual book itself kind of, falls apart a little bit for me. But what's also cool to kind of play along the whole library thing where Jen and Eric are passing the book back and forth. The book itself, the page, the edges of the pages, when a book is really old, it kind of gets yellowish. And I don't know if this is translating on the camera really well, but on the edges of these pages, let me try to get it closer there. You can kind of see it's like yellowing as if it's been artificially aged to make it seem like it was an old book. And that's really cool. So they make it seem like it's really old. To go along with the library thing, they have the little, like the white sticker that a library would have, that's categorizing it, what the year, and then like the section that it's in, STR, 813.54. So you would be able to find it in a library. And another thing that's cool is that at the beginning, or is it at the end? Yeah, at the end, they have like the stamps of when Jen and Eric, let's see here, the stamps of when Jen and Eric, took the book out and put it back. So they kind of make it really authentic looking, as if, you're not just supposed to take not for granted, but you're just supposed to assume that they passed this book back and forth. They're showing that they passed it back and forth through all these little extra details. So overall, I think I'm going to go with like a 5-star rating type of system. I'm going to go with 2 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. And because I think that the only real redeeming thing about it is that, like, it's cool to talk about people. It's cool to introduce the book to someone and say, hey, I've got this book that's, by this fictional author. It's almost like a story within a story. We've got the Book of S, which is Ship of Theseus by V.M. Straka. Which is a story and a novel of itself. And then you've got Eric and Jen's perspective, handwritten notes in the margins, which are really cool. But I think it's more enjoyable to actually tell someone, hey, this is a cool, concept for a book. I didn't really care for the book that much, but if you want to, give it a try, go ahead. So I'm going to have to give it a 2 out of 5, mainly because it just felt really scattered to me. And, I couldn't find like a clear focus on all the things that I listed. Although it is very visually beautiful, that in itself can't carry the weight of the book. So 2 out of 5 stars. Let me know how I did on my first book review. Let me know if you completely disagree with me, which I think a lot of people probably will disagree with me. I seem to be in the minority of people who didn't like it, because most of the reviews I've seen seems like a lot of people did like it. Tell me if I'm completely off, if you completely agree with me, if you're kind of so-so about it. Let me know. Share this video, like it if you want. Until next time, my name's Jeff. Welcome to Jeffrey Scott Reads a Lot, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.